The rarest hair color in the world is not black. It is not blonde. It is red. Somewhere between 1 and 2% of the global population carries it. And that scarcity has made red hair one of the most misunderstood traits in human biology. For a long time, the story told about redheads was simple: a quirky mutation, a cosmetic accident of nature. Something rare, something strange, something that would eventually fade out of the gene pool entirely. That story was never true. Red hair is not an accident. It is not a glitch. It is the visible signature of a single gene, one that has been quietly shaping human populations for tens of thousands of years, long before anyone understood what they were looking at. The gene responsible does not simply exist or not exist in a person. It hides. It waits. It moves silently through generations of people who show no outward sign of carrying it, surfacing only when the right combination lines up. That is why red hair can vanish from a family for 3 generations, and then reappear without warning. It is why 2 brunette parents can have a ginger child and wonder where it came from. The truth is that redheads are not rare because the gene is rare. They are rare because the gene almost never gets to express itself. Somewhere behind that fire-colored hair is one of the strangest and most resilient stories evolution has ever written, and DNA has only recently begun to read it in full. The gene at the center of all of it has a name most people have never heard: MC1R. It sits on chromosome 16, and its job under normal circumstances is to tell the body to produce eumelanin, the dark pigment responsible for brown and black hair. When MC1R works as intended, hair goes dark. When it is disrupted, the body defaults to a different pigment entirely, pheomelanin, the reddish-yellow compound that gives red hair its color. For someone to actually have red hair, they typically need 2 copies of the mutated gene, one inherited from each parent. That is what makes it recessive, and that is why it can disappear for generations before resurfacing. But here is the part most people never learn. A single copy of that gene does not do nothing. It hides in plain sight, and it can still express itself in unexpected places, most famously on the face. This is the biology behind the so-called ginger beard, the phenomenon of men with blonde, brown, or even black hair on their heads who grow noticeably red facial hair. It is not a fluke. It is the MC1R gene, finding a smaller, quieter way to surface, even in someone who was never considered a redhead at all. Geneticists in the Netherlands have confirmed that any man with a redheaded ancestor, however distant, carries a real chance of growing a ginger beard. In Ireland, the pattern is so common that one publication only half-jokingly claimed nearly every Irishman has at least a touch of ginger hidden somewhere in his beard. When people picture a redhead, the image that comes to mind is almost always the same: fair skin, light eyes, a face that fits neatly into a narrow, stereotypically European mold. That image is incomplete, and in some cases, it is simply wrong. Red hair has turned up in populations that break every assumption built around it. Photographer Michelle Marshall documented this directly in a portrait series named after the MC1R gene itself, featuring redheads of Afro-Caribbean descent, their hair every bit as fiery as any depiction of Ed Sheeran or Christina Hendricks. In China, the Uyghur population counts natural redheads among its people, a detail that still surprises those unfamiliar with the region's genetic history. In both cases, researchers trace the trait back to some degree of European ancestry, though not necessarily recent ancestry. Then there is the Solomon Islands, where the pattern breaks entirely. Between 5 and 10% of the population, people with notably dark skin, carry naturally blonde or reddish hair. For years, scientists assumed this had to trace back to some forgotten European contact, the same explanation used everywhere else. It did not hold up. Genetic analysis revealed an entirely different gene at work, TYRP1, with no connection to European ancestry whatsoever. It evolved independently, in complete isolation from the mutation responsible for red hair in Europe. Red hair, it turns out, is not one story. It is at least 2, arrived at separately by different populations on opposite sides of the planet through entirely unrelated genetic paths. If red hair carries no advantage, Evolution would have quietly erased it long ago. It did not. That alone should have been the first clue that something else was happening. The answer lies not in the hair itself, but in the skin underneath it. The same genetic mutation responsible for red pigment also produces unusually pale skin, and pale skin has one critical advantage in the right environment. It absorbs ultraviolet light far more efficiently than darker skin does. In regions with abundant, direct sunlight, that advantage means nothing. But in places where sunlight is scarce, filtered through clouds, fog, or long winters, that same trait becomes essential for producing enough vitamin D to survive. Scientists believe this is precisely what happened tens of thousands of years ago as early humans migrated into northern Europe. In sun-starved climates, the population that could manufacture vitamin D efficiently, even from weak, indirect light, held a genuine survival advantage over those who could not. Natural selection did not need red hair to spread widely to succeed. It needed the trait to persist just long enough in just the right places. That is exactly what happened. Certain regions of the world became what researchers now casually call ginger pockets, concentrated clusters where the recessive gene is carried by a significantly higher percentage of the population than anywhere else on Earth. England, Scotland, and Ireland sit at the center of this pattern, not by coincidence, but because their climates, cloudy, cool, and low in direct sunlight for much of the year, created exactly the conditions this ancient adaptation was built for. Red hair was never a mutation without purpose. It was a vitamin D solution, quietly encoded into human DNA, long before anyone understood what sunlight had to do with survival. If ginger pockets exist, the numbers should prove it, and they do. There is no formal global census for redheads, but researchers estimate that 1 to 2% of the world's population carries the trait, translating into tens of millions of people scattered unevenly across the globe. Nowhere is that concentration more visible than in Scotland. A 2013 DNA study identified Scotland as the planet's ginger capital, with roughly 6% of the population carrying naturally red hair, more than triple the global average. Drill down further, and the concentration becomes even more striking. In the Edinburgh region specifically, an estimated 40% of the population carries the genetic predisposition for red hair, whether or not that gene ever visibly expresses itself. That is not a fluke of one small city. That is a population where nearly 1 in every 2 people is quietly carrying the code for fire-colored hair, waiting for the right combination to bring it to the surface. Ireland and England follow closely behind, forming a tight cluster of nations where this recessive gene simply refused to fade the way it did almost everywhere else on Earth. Move across the Atlantic, and the picture shifts again. The United States, despite lacking anything resembling a ginger pocket of its own, is estimated to be home to as many as 18 million redheads, the largest raw number of any country on the planet, a byproduct of centuries of migration from precisely the regions where this ancient gene concentrated in the first place. The numbers tell a consistent story. This was never random distribution. It was ancient selection, and its fingerprint is still visible on a map today. One thing before the final piece, everything I just showed you about redhead ancestry is traceable inside your own DNA results. Over at the OriginYT, I built a 3-volume PDF guide bundle that teaches you how to unlock your raw data, find relatives, and uncover those deeper origin stories. Link is below. Now here's what nobody talks about. The same gene that colors the hair does not stop there. It reaches into the nervous system, and the consequences are stranger than most redheads realize. For years, the idea that gingers require more anesthesia was treated inside the medical community as little more than an urban legend, a rumor passed between anesthesiologists with no real science behind it. Then researchers actually tested it, and the legend turned out to be true. People carrying the MC1R gene, which includes the majority of redheads along with a hidden population of non-redheaded carriers, require measurably more medication to achieve general anesthesia than the rest of the population. Local anesthetics behave differently too. Redheads are less responsive to the numbing agents used in routine procedures like dental work, a finding significant enough that a study by the American Dental Association linked it directly to higher rates of dental phobia and dental avoidance among redheads. It is not irrational fear. It is a body that does not respond to standard numbing the way everyone else's does. Temperature sensitivity follows the same pattern. Gingers register pain from heat more intensely, meaning something as simple as an overly hot cup of coffee can produce a sharper, more immediate reaction than it would in someone without the gene. But the story's not entirely bad news. When it comes to opiate-based painkillers, the same MC1R mutation works in the opposite direction, making carriers less sensitive to pain at equivalent doses. The gene that colors the hair rewires how the entire body processes pain, in both directions, depending on what kind of pain it is. Ask whether redheads have thick hair or thin hair, and the honest answer is both, depending entirely on what you are measuring. Strand for strand, red hair is the thickest hair color there is, with a larger individual diameter than blonde, brown, or black hair. But count the total number of strands on the scalp, and the pattern flips completely. Redheads average around 90,000 hair follicles, compared to roughly 100,000 for blondes and 140,000 for brunettes. Fewer follicles, thicker strands. That is the paradox, and both halves of it are true at the same time. The color itself carries its own stubborn biology. Red pigment is notoriously difficult to strip through bleaching, which is exactly why brunettes attempting to go blonde frequently end up with an unwanted brassy copper tone. Their hair was never purely brown to begin with. It carried red pigment underneath the whole time, and bleach simply revealed what was already there. That same resistance shows up again decades later, in an entirely different way. As redheads age, their hair rarely turns the gray most people expect. Instead, it tends to shift towards strawberry blonde, because the natural lightening process that happens to every aging scalp interacts differently with red pigment than it does with brown or black. The result is that red hair does not fade into gray the way other hair colors do. It fades sideways into a paler version of the same fire, refusing, even in old age, to fully let go of the color it started with. Long before science understood why red hair existed, artists were already obsessed with what it looked like. Titian, the defining painter of the 16th century Venetian school, filled his canvases with red-headed women so consistently that a specific shade of auburn now bears his name. Titian red survives today, both as a paint color and as a word used to describe redheads themselves, a rare case of an artist's palette becoming permanently fused with a human trait. Centuries later, the pre-Raphaelite painter Rossetti carried that obsession further, casting red-headed women as his central muses, models he referred to as his flaming libertines, one of whom became his lover as well as his subject. Other major artists fell into the same pattern. Toulouse-Lautrec and Degas were both consistently drawn to red-haired subjects, finding something in the color that other artists overlooked. Degas arguably produced the single most iconic ginger artwork in Western painting, La Coiffure, a canvas dominated entirely by red, showing an older woman combing out the long, fiery hair of a younger woman against a deep crimson background. None of this was accidental. Red hair catches light differently than any other natural hair color, and it catches attention the same way. Brightness paired with genuine rarity, a combination almost impossible for a painter trained to notice color to ignore. What natural selection built for surviving cloudy northern winters, painters spent centuries chasing across canvas after canvas without ever knowing they were responding to the same underlying biology that made the trait so rare and so visually magnetic in the first place. Red hair has not just survived in ordinary people, it has sat on thrones. Elizabeth I, Queen of England from 1558 until her death in 1603, remains the most iconic royal redhead in history, and she wore that identity deliberately, styling elaborate wigs to keep her red hair a permanent part of her public image, with some accounts even claiming she had her horse's tails dyed to match. That choice was not vanity alone. Red hair carried real political weight for her. Her father, Henry VIII, had been a redhead himself, and Elizabeth's matching hair color served as a visible, undeniable claim to her legitimacy as his true heir, at a time when questions about succession could cost a monarch everything. Her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, inherited that same Tudor red hair, though in her case, it proved nowhere near enough to protect either her throne or her life. This was also a strange moment in history to embrace red hair publicly, since the trait was widely stigmatized at the time, associated with the Irish, the Scots, and anti-Semitic depictions of Judas in religious art. Elizabeth wore it anyway, using her pale skin and fiery hair to visually separate Protestant England from the darker, Catholic-dominated identity of the rest of Europe. That royal red thread did not end with the Tudors. Prince Harry carries it today, often joking that official portraits exaggerate just how ginger he really is. That same red hair once made him an unlikely target when a self-described ginger extremist with neo-Nazi views plotted, unsuccessfully, to eliminate Prince Charles and Prince William so that Harry and his red hair would ascend to the throne instead. For years, headlines confidently predicted that redheads were on their way to extinction, disappearing within a few generations as climates grew sunnier and the genetic advantage that once protected them faded away. That prediction rested on a chain of assumptions that mostly collapsed under scrutiny. It assumed future climates would consistently favor darker pigmentation. It assumed red hair conferred no benefit beyond sun sensitivity. And most critically, it ignored the actual mechanics of how this gene survives. Red hair only appears when someone inherits 2 copies of the mutated gene, one from each parent. But countless people carry just a single copy, showing no red hair at all, while still holding the gene firmly in their DNA, ready to pass it forward. As long as 2 of those hidden carriers, anywhere in the world, have children together, there remains a real chance that child will be born a redhead, seemingly out of nowhere, to parents who never suspected they were carrying the gene at all. This is precisely why red hair can vanish from a family tree for generations and then reappear without warning. The gene was never gone. It was only waiting for the right match. Extinction requires an entire gene to disappear completely from a population, not merely become less visible. And for a trait this deeply embedded, spread across millions of hidden carriers on nearly every continent, that kind of complete disappearance is not on the horizon. Redheads are not fading away. They are simply doing what this gene has always done best, waiting quietly, generation after generation, for the right moment to reappear. Red hair was never a fluke of nature. It was never a random glitch, a cosmetic accident, or a trait teetering on the edge of disappearance. It is one of the oldest, most deliberate solutions the human body ever engineered, a survival strategy written into DNA more than 50,000 years ago, when early humans pushed into the cold, sun-starved corners of northern Europe and needed a way to keep making vitamin D from almost no sunlight at all. That single genetic adaptation rippled outward into everything else this story has uncovered. It changed how bodies respond to pain and anesthesia. It changed how hair ages, resists color, and refuses to fully gray. It shaped which regions of the world became ginger pockets, and which populations, oceans apart, arrived at red or reddish hair through entirely separate genetic paths of their own. It captured the attention of painters centuries before science understood why. It sat on the head of a queen who used it to secure her throne and nearly cost a modern prince his life. Every strand of red hair carries that entire history inside it, an ancient adaptation, still quietly working, still occasionally surfacing in people who never expected it. The golden thread running through royal courts, artists' studios, and dental chairs alike was never a coincidence. It was biology, hiding in plain sight, waiting 50,000 years to finally be understood.
Thanks for watching. Before you head out, don't let your DNA profile just sit there collecting digital dust. Tap the link in the description to download your ebook and finally make sense of it all tonight.